Hi everyone, I'm Matt Anderson and welcome to The Road Not Taken, how ordinary people got out of their own way and you can too. Delighted to introduce our guest today, Melissa Masitto. So Melissa, if you wouldn't mind just saying a few words about yourself to introduce you to the audience, that would be a great way for us to kick things off today.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure meeting you all virtually. I started a conversation with Matt a while back in regards to I grew up in small town Ohio. It's Marysville, if anybody even knows where that is. And I'm one of 7 children, so I was raised with 5 sisters and 1 brother, and a Baptist minister's family. So that's kind of where my beginnings happened, and then kind of took it from there, going to school for radiology, and then really wanted to take that into sonography, and ultrasound is probably a little bit more common for you to know about. And then wound up working at a hotel. And that took me in a totally different direction and brought me here.
And I'm looking forward to hearing more about that because it's absurdly immodest to just say you just started working at a hotel. That brings back memories for me on my early networking days when I'd meet people at the local, and I don't want to, badmouth any hotels, but just a hotel that basically no one's heard of that was in some small town, and that's far from the work that you do now. Although I know that's where you started, I'm keen to learn more. Just to sort of start out our conversation in terms of the kind of the getting out of your own way theme for you. What prompted you most to? I mean, in one level, to go much bigger places, and for many of us, it starts on a dark day, where we sort of hit a wall of some kind. Can you kind of talk us through that low point in terms of what was happening and what happened next?
I think initially, being raised a Baptist minister's daughter, it was obligatory to go to a year of Christian college. And I'll never forget the day that my parents dropped me off. And I looked at them calmly and said, "Take me home." And they're like, "Okay, she's not kicking, she's not screaming, she's not yelling, she's not crying. She's just asking for us to take her home." And they didn't. And they turned around and left. And I'm standing there going, okay, my parents are in Ohio. I'm now in Pensacola, Florida. And I don't know a soul. And I don't talk to people. In general, like I was very quiet as a child and somewhat shy, and here I am needing to figure out life. So that was probably my my bottom point, and my stubborn streak is what probably helped propel me through that, and meeting some great people. But it was quite a dump into the real world.
So did you stay in the college or did you get a job instead?
No, they left me there, so I stayed, and I had a wonderful 1 year of college. But I started off in education because I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I was like, great, I'll start in education. I audited a kindergarten class for a month, and I was like, I thought I liked kids. But if you leave me in a schoolroom with children all day long, I won't like them for long. So I quickly learned that was definitely not the path that I wanted to take in education. So I finished my 1 year, and then I went back to my parents. Then lived in Rochester, Indiana, another no-name, middle of nowhere place. I lived there for 8 months. Trying to figure out what I wanted to do, because I literally had no idea. And that's when, and my parents were also very much that, we were raised, you go to school, you get married, you have children, that's how you live your life. And that's just, there were no options to that. That's just how it was. And so I concocted an idea that said, Greenville, South Carolina seems like a great place to go. There's a good school there. My parents enjoy the network there. And my mother was a radiologist or tech. And so I was like, the Lord has decided that this is what I should do. And because the Lord spoke to me, that was allowed, that I could leave home and go all those miles away from home. And I had two sisters that wound up following me there. And we went to Greenville, South Carolina, lived in a trailer park. Yes, trailer trash right here. And that was where I started going to school and started working at a hotel.
So
now expected, right?
No, that's for sure. So when did you got a job at the hotel, at a hotel? Now, initially it was to help pay for college. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right. And so at what point did your thinking start to shift, where you started to say, oh, this is more engaging and interesting than I thought?
Almost immediately. So when working at the hotel, and I think the year in college in Pensacola, Florida, I really started to come out and find out who I was. I think living at home with so many people, it was who you were expected to be, not who I really was. So that's where I think I started the discovery. And then when I went to Greenville, South Carolina, that was such a learning curve for me. And it's, from a protected environment to now I'm on my own figuring life out. So I did start initially just for money for college. And I fell in love with it because at the front desk, you'd see people come up, and it was very humble beginnings. This was a roadside motel. It's nothing to brag about. My parents were mortified that I was working there, but it was paying bills. And so I started to love the thrill of somebody would come up, and you had to fill the hotel that evening. And so what rate were you going to charge them? How are you going to get them into the hotel and not let them leave the door, because you had to fill every single room every single night.
Wow.
That was your goal. And I just really enjoyed that and started progressing. 3 months in, they were like, would you like to be the front office manager? And I'm like, sure. Is it more money? That was my only motivation there. But I think that's where I got hooked in the industry and just fell in love with it. It's crazy. It's 24/7. Never a dull moment. You never know what you're going to encounter from a day-to-day standpoint. And I liked that diversity of what you encountered. And I think that's where I started to realize that radiology, a clinical, sterile environment, was really not what I wanted to do.
So is it fair to say then that you had a somewhat repressive upbringing, or at least because you said something about at home you were who you were supposed to be? So I mean, I don't know, what's your perspective there? Is it that you think that's just normal for all of us, is that we sort of play a role because our parents expect it, and then, or do you think that for you it was a bit stronger than that because of the Baptist background?
It was very much a bit stronger than that. I think my parents were they were saved very late in life and became Christians right before they started having children. And so they came into that world with very defined how we needed to behave, what we needed to be like. So we were raised in a very strict environment with this is how you should think about things. And it was not a lot of room for dialogue. This is how you should think. This is how you should behave. You are the preacher's children. Everybody is looking to you. Mm-hmm. So the way you behave is a reflection on us. And so there was not a lot of latitude in growing up. And so it was very repressive. It was very sheltered. We went to our own Christian school. My dad was our principal. Mm-hmm. Wow. That's how we were. I mean, we were raised. My sisters were my best friends. And my only friends, essentially. So, yes, very, very sheltered, I would say. And that since changed as we started to grow up, as we left the house and the younger children. I was number 2. So being one of the older ones, you kind of had to pave the way, mm-hmm. essentially. So we made it easier for the younger ones.
So are you saying then, so I mean, to what extent were you a natural introvert Because, you know, you described yourself as a silent child, or was that just, again, just being a, you know, an obedient daughter? Because I'm particularly curious about when you said you went to college. What caught my attention was when you said I started to find out who I really was. So, of course, I'm particularly interested in what you did to find out who you really were, and then, of course, also who you started to sense that you were also, in terms of what you were loved to do and were capable of doing. So can you talk first about the things that you did that helped you get to know yourself better?
I think leaving home is where I started to figure out who I was, but I still had all of the ideas of what I should be. So learning to drop that really, it took a while. And so going into the hotel industry, and as I started to progress my career there, you get exposed to so much. You're traveling, you're meeting people from so many different environments. Diversity takes on a whole new level because all I knew was small town America. And now I'm traveling to big cities, and I'm meeting people from so many different backgrounds. And I think that that's where I started learning what life I wanted for myself. But it took me probably until my 30s before I really started to learn who I was. It probably took a marriage and a divorce before I really started to say, who am I and why am I this person, and really where do I want to go? I was very driven, very focused, even as a child. I was the one that my parents could leave me alone for the day, and I'd have all of the chores done in the house. I'd have all the kids lined up with everything done, house clean and ready, dinner on the table. Like, it was just, you knew the routine, you got it done, and you made things happen. And I think that's always propelled me through life, is what needs to be done, let's get it done, let's organize people, mobilize, and go. So that was learned at a very early age.
So I'll have to pause for a second, because I want to ask you about that focus and organization and drive. For those of you that are, you know, want to learn more, or get, you know, just connect with Melissa after today's show, you know, one of the many reasons that engaged me when I first was introduced to Melissa was her LinkedIn profile, because I've never seen anything like it. Even, I don't know if for you it's normal or you know, typical. I don't know, and I'm just half asleep. But I mean, given that, I mean, I've interacted with thousands of people in the sales world. You know, if you go to Melissa's LinkedIn profile, I mean, it's astonishing how it's laid out in terms of your accomplishments. I mean, these are, and then, I mean, in terms of there's nothing vague about them. I mean, they're meticulously spelt out in terms of numbers and achievements, in a way that I was just thinking, oh my goodness me, this woman is really going places and really driven and has accomplished a lot. And I'd love to get to know her more, because I'd love to find out more about how, you know, what drives you, and also obviously the things you do to help you be so effective. So that's just a little background for everybody. You know, but obviously for the purpose of people listening, I mean, all of us would like more drive, focus, and to be more organized. So, you know, in that regard, can you be helpful at all in that? In other words, are these things that have just been innate in you, or, you know, did you learn them from necessity, or can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it all drives from my parents, and I have to thank them for this, because as sheltered as we were, we also learned discipline. We learned, my dad being a Baptist minister, he was all about the acronym and the outline for his speaking, and that's how he spoke, and that's how we were taught to speak and to present. And yes, we'd get called on to share testimony in church, and you had to be well thought out, and you'd be sweating and nervous and not wanting to speak, but you had to get up there and do it. So I think being forced to do some of those things was good. And then being one of 7 children, it was like running a mini hotel. We just all got to live in it, right? And so my mom would sit down and we'd have the chores for the week, and each of us kids would have what we needed to do. And so it was very organized. We also knew that every 2 weeks it would change. So those that weren't as disciplined, they were like, if I just don't do it for a while, somebody else will pick it up or the job will change. And so we had all those dynamics as well. But I think those are things that laid a great foundation, because you learned how to be organized. You learned how to mobilize 7 kids in a direction where we could have been going in a million different places. And we were left to do that because our parents were also taking care of the church people, so they might have to go for a hospital visit, etc. So as the older children, we always took care of everybody.
Okay, so a lot of it you learned growing up, or a lot of that discipline you were almost drilled on, and I've got lots of practice on it growing up. What else was it, though, that you fell in love with when you started working at the hotel? Because, you used the word thrill. I mean, was it the sales piece? Because it sounds like it was a sales job initially, that if your job was to fill up the hotel, your job was therefore to talk people into it and figure out what rate. It's so funny, when you said that, I thought, I didn't know you could do that. that there was freedom or wiggle room.
Totally different world today.
Yes, I suppose so. That's funny. But what was that what was the thrill? Was it the thrill of, was it sales related, or was it around persuasion, or was it building on the skills you had? But because this is a different, I mean, obviously it's completely different.
What excited me is building relationships with your customers that came on a regular basis. It was problem solving, because you were, as I said, it was a very humble beginning at a hotel. You could be the only person there at night. And you had to, if you had a guest request, you had to take care of that guest request. You're checking people in. You had to handle multiple things at a time. When I was made a front office manager, 24/7 business, you don't have a lot of people working there. So you were basically on call all the time. And I recruited my sister to work for me at one point, and she'd call me in the middle of the night because she couldn't balance the audit. And I could tell her in my sleep. I wouldn't even remember talking to her how to balance it in my sleep, because you just knew things. You knew how everything operated. And I think that's, it was exciting to me. And then as I was able to progress, it just kind of became bigger challenges and different opportunities to, you can't have a boring day in the hotel industry.
You can't have a what?
A boring day in the hotel industry.
A brain day?
Boring.
Oh, a boring day. No. So, okay, so it's interesting. On one level, what's going through my head is you learned, you were given really an enormous amount of responsibility at a young age, and you rose to the occasion. And so it's tempting for me to be standing here right now talking to you thinking, well, didn't that give you enough confidence then to say, well, gosh, if I can handle this, then I can handle all kinds of great things? And yet I know you've had some, obviously major challenges along the way, which, so maybe I'm just being naive. But I also remember the last time you and I talked, you said something very interesting. You said something about everything has been a mountain in front of me. And that's not the impression I've gotten so far. I mean, it sounds like obviously you present with big challenges, but you did a really good job. Talk about that next mountain then.
So every position that I took on was a mountain for me. So I went from my very first hotel to opening a hotel. And in an opening, it's a construction zone. I was the number 2 person there. So I had a general manager and I was the assistant. And so you're having to hire an entire new staff, train them. And, I'm 21. So you're trying to train older people and lead them. You're setting up a whole front office system that just arrives and you need to figure it out. And you're like, okay, so how am I going to teach my team this? I don't even know how it works. So you just sit down and you figure it out, and you train everybody, and you're having to get housekeepers motivated and moving, and they're looking at you like, who are you?
Yeah.
And to show them that you could do the job that you expected them to do, and that you could get your hands dirty. And I think that that's one of the things as a leader, that getting your hands dirty with your team and not just saying, no, you guys figure it out, really helps them respect you for what you can do, and that you also understand their challenges and you're not above who they are. And so I think that helped me learn that very early on, that get in side by side and work with them. And that's what teamwork is all about. So I think that just became instilled in me very young. And I always was game for a challenge. So basically, that stubborn streak that I talked about resurfaces, because whenever it's, you can't do that, I was going to. But I was quiet about it, and I'd sit back and I'd look and I'd study and I'd figure it out. I did not finish college, so I've been self-taught my whole life. It's not been trained. There's so many resources out there. There's so many people to ask. Reading has been a lifeline. Podcasts, I listen to them avidly because I think you learn so much. And instead of just, while I'm on the tube, that's a great time for me to be learning something. So I think I've just learned very early on to capture all of those moments. And that was also part of our upbringing with my dad being the principal. We didn't go to a, quote, normal school. Our school system was through paces, which seems very odd, but you would sit at a desk by yourself and you were handed your subjects in small paces, which were little workbooks. And you'd have to work through that workbook by yourself, turn it in, take a test. If you passed the test, you got the next workbook. And then you'd have to work through it. So you learned to comprehend, and that's how you taught yourself. That's made it through all of school. So I think that has really served me as I've grown, because I can learn anything if you can read.
It's so funny. Like many, 20 years ago, I was a school teacher, and I remember leaving that profession thinking, under the impression that everyone on the planet had a different opinion about what a good education was. And just listening to you talk about how you have learned, and well, you said self-taught yourself and learned so much. Again, how you learned is pretty non-traditional, to say the least. And it's fascinating to hear how well it worked for you. And, whereas it's funny, even when you talked about the nature of how you were learning with the materials all in one little, did you say case?
Pace, P-A-C-E.
P-A-C-E.
That's what they were called.
Oh, okay. But the notion, to me, it sounds sort of a bit dull. In other words, that it was, because when I think of workbooks, I'm immediately kind of groan, like there's thinking about it, like fill in the blanks and multiple choice and so on. But again, it's just a testimony to that. To me, it's a testimony to what some people would call fundamentals, I suppose, but just the importance of practice. That it was hardwiring you to actually end up being very independent. But two things I want to highlight just from the things you just said for myself is your mindset. And that's why I like these conversations, because you said I was always game for a challenge. And then you said there are so many resources out there. But again, these are very empowered ways of looking at the world, that when there's a problem, I think too often we're guilty of caving in or giving up, at least for a while, or getting just frustrated. But if you've got a go-to way of looking at things, as if to say, okay, I just fell on my face here, I'm going to get up because I know that if people tell me I can't do it, well, I've been there and been in that position before. I know I can, and there's lots of places I can go to get help and information. So I kind of want to ask you about failure. What is your attitude to it? We all experience it. How do you handle it?
It's going to happen. I think failure and feedback are two things that have also fueled me. So there's been and I think it's also how I've been supported through failure as well. At one of my jobs, I made a massive error for one of our franchisees, and in a franchise relationship, it's a little bit more tenuous because they have so many different options that they can go with, and they're quite vocal, as they should be in an organization. And so this was very early on in my career, and I accidentally closed out inventory for the wrong hotel. And that's a mistake you don't want to make on a busy weekend. And my boss handled it amazing, because he's like, Melissa, you don't make mistakes often, but when you do, you do them well, like everything that you do. And he stood with me, and we figured it out, and we made it right for that franchisee and took care of everything. But it was the most nerve-wracking moments of my life, because you just hate to fail somebody to that level. And but you're constantly going to fail somebody at some point. And it's how do you recover? How do you own it? I think that, again, through my upbringing, we were raised to own your circumstances and to be accountable. So I think that upbringing and that rigidity almost has served me well, because when you own it and you say, you know what, you're right, I made this mistake, nobody else did it. Even if my team did it, it's me that did it. We are in this together. And the response that you get to that is quite positive, because they're not used to it. And your team responds to it quite positively as well, because they feel the support that we're in this together. And when you don't throw them under the bus for that error, they never make it again. Yeah. They're so thankful for that opportunity. And I learned that very young, and I've been able to pay that forward.
No, I love what you just said. You said the response you get when you own it is quite positive, because they don't expect it. It's a bit of an indictment on the rest of us, really. But
yeah, I think we're just in a culture where so many people, it's when you're on the hot seat, it's so much easier to deflect. And somebody always wants the fall guy, right? And so when you just take it immediately, I think it just almost, they don't look for the fall guy because you just owned it. So it kind of takes that heat out of it immediately.
So what was another mountain that you had to deal with then? You know, you were so young when you had the next opportunity to be number 2 at a hotel. What was your next mountain? And the other thing I'm going to ask you, actually, so before that, is I'm curious about why you use the word mountain, because it's, how do you see? It sounds like I'm splitting hairs here, but do you see the mountain in a positive, like as a massive hurdle, or as in fact a challenge to climb, knowing that there's going to be another taller peak ahead? Like, I'm just curious how you see that.
I think you just look up and you see this wall and you're like, oh no, have I done it to myself? This is the time I'm not going to be able to climb over this or get through it or around it. But I think that that's also where the exciting part begins, because then it's how are you going to tackle that challenge? So my next one was I went into a regional position where I had to go into hotels and work with them from a quality assurance standpoint, training and sales. So it's kind of rolling a lot of pieces together, and you were basically the one source for everyone. And again, being not the boldest person and being somewhat shy, I had to, I pulled up to my first hotel, and I'm sitting in the car, and I'm like, how on earth am I going to, again, I'm not even 25 yet, how am I going to walk in and tell a general manager of a hotel whether a room's clean, dirty, whether they're meeting the franchise regulations, how to sell? Like, these are people that have been in the industry for 20 years. And there's many cases where owned the hotel. And here I had to go in and give them advice and grade them. So them staying in the franchise, that was in my hands in how I graded them. Mm-hmm. So it was very intimidating. But I met some amazing people. And again, through my leaders' support, I did have one hotel that I had failed a couple times, and we're sitting there having a conversation with the owner and my boss. And the owner looks at my boss and goes, "You send this little girl straight out of high school and she can determine whether I pass or fail?" And I'm sitting there like, "I'm right here. I can hear you. That was your outside voice." And thank you, because I'm not right out of high school. But yeah, so it was moments like that you just had to really draw on inner strength and take some deep breaths. And then you were grateful for your bosses that supported you too.
Yeah. Do you recall what you said to get yourself out of the car in that first situation where you were saying, what on earth am I doing here? I'm not even 25, and I'm going to be talking to people much more senior and experienced than me and giving them advice and telling them whether they passed or failed.
Yeah, I think I just sat there and I was like, you have two choices. Turn around, drive home and quit, or get out of the car and go in and just see what happens. And so fortunately, I got out of the car and went in and started the conversation. And I think that I learned through all of my roles, just you have to start somewhere. It's extremely nerve-wracking, but just dive in. Prepare as much as you can and then dive in. Just go for it. Because that's the only way you're going to learn. And so, I think that's also where you draw on those resources as well. And I had great friends that were much older than me that were in the same position. And so they had taken me and had shown me what they do. And so you're just like, all right, at least I have somebody that I can copy and mimic. Mm-hmm. And when I'm done, you get on the phone and you call them and you're like, oh my gosh, this is what just happened. And they're there to support you as well. So I think I've been very fortunate to have so many support people in my life that have carried me through.
One thing I'm really curious about as you talk about this is how many of the people you've met over the years that are still more or less in the same position they were when you first met them. And really where I'm going with this is, I'm sure many times along the way you could have stayed in Texas or Louisiana or, forgive me, I forget where else you've been in the US, maybe Georgia, but you haven't. You've continued to go on to more high-powered positions. And as I said, for the purpose of those listening, I know you're now consulting with hotels in, I don't know, how many different countries?
Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India.
All right, so that's all. Right. So, but I'm fascinated in this point. You could have stayed put. You could have stayed as this person that was doing quality control, and you would have had a perfectly well compensated job. You were clearly, could have. So what is it that's what prompted you to want to keep trying something new and really, again, from the corporate standpoint, continue to kind of move up into bigger and more challenging roles?
I just have had a drive in me always. And I think it's sometimes been a perfectionism drive, but it's always to do more, do better, and keep moving forward. And I think at some points it was maybe a little bit too driven. Mm-hmm. I was too focused and too work-oriented that you can almost let life pass you by. And so I've met people along the way that have helped me. As I mentioned, I was married and divorced, and that set me back a while, but he gave me a gift of getting me to pause and getting me to do things I would have never done before. Mm-hmm. And without that, I think I would I'm still extremely driven, but I now am balancing work and life a little better than I used to. Some people would say that's still not the case, but but I think work is also fun and I enjoy it. And that's one of the reasons why you spend so much time in it, because it does energize you. And I think I've also been that type of person that I just love a challenge. I love figuring it out. I love solving it, and then I'm terrified of the next challenge, but I go head first.
What I want to ask, and I don't think I've got the perfectly worded question, but I'm curious what your perspective is on the people that stay put, that are still assistant managers at places, or again in a role that and what I'm saying with this is, what I'm trying to say is, I've coached so many people over the years that they hired me to move up a food chain in their world, mostly in sales, and I would say that, let's say 80% of the time, those people are still there, whether it was 3 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago. And it was such a gut-wrenching experience to notice that when I went through my LinkedIn. This was last year, I don't know, let's say 9-12 months ago. But that's part of why I'm having these conversations, because part of me feels slightly responsible, like gosh, couldn't I have done a better job? And to you, talking, when I talk to someone like you, I mean, it sounds sort of like quite a logical progression, although it so isn't, because I mean, obviously it takes enormous courage. As you say, I love a challenge, but I'm terrified about the next one, but I dive in anyway. I feel like clearly most people don't, or they get stopped somewhere. Like what I'm trying to say is, I believe many more people out there do want more. And I'm just curious for your perspective, because obviously you manage and consult with people in these positions often. So what do you see as some of the most common sticking points for people?
I think you have to realize that success looks different to other people. And I've learned to respect what success looks like to each individual, and to actually love sometimes those people that don't have this obsession of getting to the next level. Because when you look at it in any business, the value of the information that somebody's been there for 10 years is amazing. What they bring to that organization is so valuable in knowledge. The key is how do they stay fresh every day? And I think that's what your job as a leader is how do you inspire and understand each individual and what motivates them? Because not everybody is motivated by money. Not everybody is motivated by getting that next position, getting that next title. It's balancing the ones that do want that, and sometimes tempering that, because they're like, I did a good job yesterday, don't I get a promotion today? And you're like, well, no, that's the day. So sometimes you have to have those conversations, because that's how quickly they want to move, and you have to frame and make sure that they have the right foundation, because if they don't have that right foundation in their career, you see them rise up the ranks so quickly, and then they combust, and then they fall down to the bottom, and that's not what you want to have. But you have to kind of guide them through that process. But the ones that are staying in their position for a long time, I think as long as they have a fresh perspective and challenge themselves every day, and think new and fresh, those people can be gold. And I don't look at them any differently. And they have been very supportive of me through my career. And for that, I thank them, because they're also the ones that I go to at times and say, okay, I'm trying to deal with this and I can't solve it. And they're able to help you solve it, because they can get granular and they know the background and they know the buildup of something that I would not have the time to drill through and understand at the level that they do. So I think respecting each person's choice, and it could be because they're raising a family. It could be because they have family that they're taking care of in their hometown and they can't leave that town, and they love their job and want to stay there. So I think it's each person has a different best, and how do you support that?
And yeah, it sounds like you're very empathic, or you have to be very empathic to be effective in your role, so that people feel like they're understood. One thing you said several times in this conversation so far is you were just referencing, you said something like, sometimes I need their help. And on various other occasions, you've talked about how beneficial the support of colleagues has been. Can you kind of tell us a story about where you learned that need to get help or support?
I don't know exactly where I learned it. I think it's just been kind of the foundation of maybe my upbringing or through my career. I think people are very special, and they are the essence of what we do and what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And you can either step on them or you can step with them. And I think people, I just had a conversation with a very good friend of mine, and we were working through how we could help one of our team. And there's really two ways to get ahead: either step on people or take care of the people that are around you. You've got to always take care of your leaders as well. But if you don't take care of the people around you and under you, when you get to the top, nobody's cheering. Nobody's excited for you. That's a really lonely world. And I think I've just chosen the path that I would much rather be appreciated and have my team feel support than to just take care of the bosses, and that's all I'm concerned about. I think you really have to have the balance. I choose to have the balance. Mm-hmm. You don't have to get to the top, but that's my choice.
So it's been a number of things. I know when we talked on a previous occasion, you'd mentioned Baltimore and New Orleans as a couple of places where I think something rough had happened and lessons had been learned. I mean, again, is there something from one of those instances that has helped you become who you are today?
Yes. When I went to Baltimore, my general manager was Gail Smith Howard, and everybody was like, "Oh, you're going to work for Gail Smith Howard?" And I'm like, "Yes." The way that you're saying that scares me, but everything everybody told me about this lady, I was like, she sounds amazing. Why does everybody say it with such trepidation? And I had the opportunity to go and work with her for 3 years, and she is an amazing, amazing lady, mentor. I talk to her to this day, and you talk about somebody overcoming adversity in their life and being such a support system. And I think she always would come into my office, and we'd sit down. We had to deal with many hard situations in that role. And she would come in, and she would just have this thing where she would sit there and she'd be like, "Always do the right thing. Always do the right thing. It's not always easy, but what is the right thing to do?" And we'd have to walk through situations, whether it was for a customer or whether it was for our team, and say, what is the right thing? Okay, this is going to be tough, but this is what we need to do. Mm-hmm. And I really took that away from her and respect her for that, because that's not been an easy thing for her to do. And that's something that I really look at as I pay it forward. And she's the one that helped me get the position in New Orleans. And my first time there, I go down thinking I'm interviewing for the job. And the general manager was like, "No, I'm recruiting you." And I'm like, but we have very few African-American general managers and fewer women in our organization, and I got to work for 2 of them. And the tenacity that they had to have and what they had to do to get where they are at is just amazing. And so I think when people see and put you through a tough time, it's because they know that you can handle it, and they want to see what you can handle. And I think sometimes that's hard to realize when you're going through it, because you're like, why me? I feel like I'm getting picked on. But it's kind of like the coaches that you hear about, right? The guy that's getting picked on the most, or the girl that's getting picked on the most, is the one that they see raw talent in, and they want to really help you push through and get to your best. And so, especially when I was in New Orleans, we had, opening a hotel that had been closed for 6 years after Katrina. It wasn't the easiest thing to do. We did not have, typically you have 4 years to sell into a hotel like that before you open. We had 10 months.
Wow.
And I came in right after the hotel opened, so I wasn't there in that 10 months prior. So opening year, owners have just put $285 million into the hotel. They're expecting a return, and we're going from 0 to 100. And we didn't have a full team. We had a lot of challenges in building a team there, and my general manager was always supportive and 1,000% pushing. And at one point, I was like, I feel like team members were leaving. You just felt like you were failing everybody. And I finally went to our HR, and she was somebody I'd worked with when I was in Atlanta as well. And I went down and I was like, I need help, and I need to figure out how to ask for this. And she sat there with me, had a few tears, hated crying, but every once in a while a good old cry is worth it. And so I had to sit in front of my general manager and say, I need help. And to his credit, he was absolutely amazing and completely gracious and said, okay, fair enough. And he spent the money for me to get 6 months of coaching, and also for the team to get coaching. So we did a whole exercise with the team in how to rebuild, how to pull together as a team, how to respect each other for who we all were, and to understand that. And so we did team coaching, and then I had the individual coaching myself. And through that process, I give a lot of credit to Jane Creswell, because she was amazing at working with me through that process. And another person that I stay in touch with to this day, because she's just a great resource and really an encouragement. And I was so glad I asked for that help, because I think that just really helped bolster my confidence. And I was doing the right things, but I just completely lost confidence in myself with all the changes, some within my control, some without of my control, but they were still happening on my watch. And so we were able to really bring the hotel to success and really pull the team together. And that was pretty exciting to get to a breakthrough on the other side of that.
So Jane was the coach?
Yeah.
And the most helpful part of the coaching was that it was reassurance that you were doing the right thing. You just couldn't see it at the time, or there weren't enough things working, or visible signs of progress. Is that what you're saying was most helpful about the coaching?
Yeah, I think it was the clarity of thought and really forcing me to put my game plan in place on how I was going to approach things, to really respect the personalities that I had to work with. And I think, as you grow in your career, you get more and more people that you're working with and more personalities, and they all don't fall in line like when I was a child. Mm-hmm. And mom said we had to do this and everybody'd fall in line. Well, it doesn't work that way. So you have to really understand who people are and work with them to get to a mission. And it's just not... it's not easy. You've got a lot of people that get going in a direction, and you've got to kind of sell the philosophy and understand all of their perspectives and opinions and how to pull all that together to create the best way forward. And I think it's just putting all of that together. It was a much bigger project than I had ever worked on before. So it was how to really reframe and grow into the next level.
That sounds like a dumb question, but I mean, how do you understand the approach of others? Because it sounds like it could be multiple people. Is there a format for that, or do you do it individually? Do you do it socially? Does it depend on the person? I'm guessing you have to do this on a regular basis when you go into work with a hotel, since to them you're a stranger that might just be this. Could be this bossy person that's just about to tell them what to do. So how do you finesse that and help people feel more understood?
I wish there was a formula. And if anybody has one that works flawlessly on every person, I would love to have that, because you just, when you think something's working, it doesn't. You're like, okay, so now I have to start over. But I think that's also part of sales, right? You hit how many no's before you get to that yes. So I think it's just, how do you keep tackling it from a different way? I think listening is a big part of it, because people ultimately want to feel heard. And that's where you also learn so many things. And I think that especially in some industries, hotels being one, you move so fast that sometimes you don't stop and listen. And that's, I think, kind of where I was. I knew where we needed to go, and I was just driving. I was going for it. Well, the team wasn't. They were like, you can do that one alone. Go. And it was really stopping and pausing and listening and hearing them. And it is doing all of those things, understanding one person you got to take out for drinks and sit and hear them out. Another person doesn't want that. They get that cup of coffee, help them get motivated in the morning. Another person, that you can say, you're not working hard enough, and here's where we need to get to, and you can push them and they'll go for it. The next person, you have to have a softer approach. And so it's so dynamic and different. And then you don't know how they woke up that morning. You don't know what happened in their life that morning. And I think it's background impacts it. I think, especially living here and dealing with so many different cultural variances, it doesn't work the same everywhere. And everybody has different backgrounds that are leading in there that you have to take into consideration and respect that. And then I think it also plays into, not everybody has the same goals. So not everybody is going to work as hard as you are. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that they're any less valuable as an associate. It's just, how do you focus that time and energy that you do get from them in the right direction? And there's no formula for that either.
That's a big picture, and requires, I would imagine, also a ton of patience to, as you said, there's trial and error involved in that as well. That's interesting. So I want to come back to the drive piece, in the sense of, I suppose, there's a good chance many people listening, some of them have no issues with drive. It's other ways they're getting in their own way. But I do want to hear you talk about the enjoying life piece. So what are some things you do to make sure you're enjoying the journey? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, one, I think taking care of yourself. I have always enjoyed working out, and I used to be up at 4:30 in the morning, get my run in. When I was in Baltimore, Gail Smith Howard would have her first emails firing off to me, and I'd be firing right back. And she'd be like, "What are you doing awake?" I'm like, "I'm on the treadmill. I'll be in the office in a few." And so, I think that that has always helped sustain me, because I do work long hours, as many people do. And I think in the hotel industry, you're surrounded with food and beverage all the time. So it's, how do you make the right choices for you personally, so that you can be healthy and maintain that kind of a schedule, and be mentally fresh to deal with what people and the different challenges that you're approached with throughout the day. So I think fitness is something that's very important to me, and so I make time for that every day. I also love learning, so I enroll in different courses that I'm interested in. So like, I've been enrolled in a nutrition course just because, and I know that might not be normal, but it's what I like to do, and to keep learning and understanding something that interests me. I've really had to schedule in things that I want to do. So if I want to go to a museum, I schedule it on my calendar. Otherwise, I won't do it.
Sure.
I think even those important people in your life, they fall on the schedule as well sometimes, because again, otherwise I let things crowd in and then I'm like, oh, I don't have any free nights tonight. And sorry. So I think I've gotten better at scheduling those things. And then I think also my willingness to jump in and try something, especially when I was in New Orleans. I had a very good friend that we worked there together. And we decided we were going to go working out, and she was like, the only thing that I'd be interested in doing is CrossFit.
I knew
and I
you
was
were going
like,
to say that.
CrossFit. Well, that wasn't on my list, but I'm game for anything and I'll go. I wasn't a weightlifter, and I certainly couldn't do handstands or any of those things. And I think that also is a great experience because it's humbling, and it helps you remember what your team's going through also when you're coaching them, because you have some pretty awkward moments when you're trying to do some of those things. And you have the moments of fail, and if you don't get your form right, you're hurting yourself. And so it teaches you a lot as well. So I think that I try to learn in everything that I'm doing.
That's a good list, though. Health, learning, scheduling in key fun things, and then trying new things, which is something that, again, on theory, we've heard these things, but I mean, how many of us are actually doing this on a consistent basis? Probably not too many. And it's funny, you write about the new things too. I must admit, that's definitely one of my flaws. And yet I do read and hear over and over again the importance and value of that. And as you said, whether it's because it's humbling or because it just gives your brain a different perspective in it that's healthy in terms of willingness to do something new that's just good for the brain, so that you don't get fixated on having to do it incredibly well, because how can you expect to? You've not done it for years, or you've never done it before. I think there's immense value to that. So plus it opens up different maybe creative capacities. But I know there's lots of all these other knock-on benefits that's even like brain researchers now talking more about how important it is to do those types of things. So that's a great list. So I know we need to wrap up here, Melissa. So three final questions. The first one, I guess, is who have you become since that day your parents dropped you off in Pensacola and you said you wanted to go back home?
I think I've become a much more confident person, and I think that I have learned so much about life and culture and the world than I ever thought that I would have learned. And I think that it's also taught me what to appreciate of my upbringing, and value those values that I was raised with, because they did create and give me the foundation to be who I am today.
And in terms of a first step for other people listening, what would you recommend for people to sort of embark on a more confident journey?
I think you have to want it, and know why you want it. I think for myself, it was sometimes I knew what I didn't want, which helped me find what I wanted.
Yeah.
In many cases, because I'm like, I don't know where the next step is, but I know where I don't want to go, and that kind of opens up doors. And I think that's also been a little bit tricky in the hotel industry, because if you're not open enough, doors don't open. And if you're too open, you just flail. So it's kind of, how do you create those boundaries for yourself? And that's something I'm still learning.
And then
but it's here.
Yeah. And then lastly, Melissa, how can people follow up with you or keep in touch with you?
Well, you'll find me on most of the socials, but I'm more of a stalker than I am a communicator on them. So LinkedIn is probably the best avenue.
LinkedIn. Okay, so I'll be sure to post a link, or a link to your LinkedIn page on the show notes. Which so Melissa, thank you. I'm going to start to wrap up here at this point, but thank you everyone. Well, thank you firstly for sharing your time and wisdom on your really amazing journey from where you started to the types of things that you're getting to do now, as you said, across literally much of the world. I mean, I don't think we perhaps could have spent more time on that in a way. In terms of the types of things you do now, but at the same time, how you do it and how you got there and how you've gotten out of your own way, obviously, is kind of my focus piece that I think we can learn so much from in terms of mindsets and specific actions. And I got a lot today from in terms of how you work with other people. Now, admittedly, a lot of the people listening are thinking in terms of, I suppose, clients and prospects, but nonetheless, either way, it's the same thing. I think there's too much of almost a tacky dynamic there where, prospects are almost, pieces of meat of sorts sometimes, or treated that way suddenly if you're in the wrong sales meeting. But the perspective you gave on where other people are coming from, I think for me today, just alone has been quite humbling as well. And also just in terms of what drives people differently. So I think that level of perspective you can only get probably from working with multiple teams, not just in one country, but in many. Love to hear the cultural stuff some other time. And then for those of you listening again, obviously, please don't put anyone on a pedestal when you're listening to this show. We're all, you're all human, and none of us is perfect. And start where you are today with one positive step after another, and you can accomplish whatever you choose to do in terms of who you want to be, do, and have. So please keep that in mind. I think that's terribly important. Thank you so much for listening. I truly hope you've gotten some really useful perspectives and next steps and mindsets as well about how to approach failure and challenges. Things that we simply just need to keep repeating to ourselves since they're not sometimes hardwired for us. And then other than that, please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Please leave a review. That would be extremely helpful. If you're ever looking for a speaker on the topic, I would be happy to be one of those people to be considered on anything that revolved around helping people, again, elevate what they're doing today. And then, as I mentioned before, show notes are at matt-anderson.com, matt-anderson.com. And Melissa, again, thank you so much. And I'll wrap things up with my favorite question, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm Matt Anderson, and this was The Road Not Taken.